This is Christian Book Blurb, brought to you by author and songwriter Matt McChlery. Get a behind-the-scenes glimpse into the lives of some of your favourite Christian authors, hear about their books and faith. Also, why not check out my website, mattmcclery.com. Welcome to the Christian Book Blurb, where we like to encourage you in your discipleship one book at a time, as we meet some amazing Christian authors and learn about their books, their lives, and their faith. I'm your host, Matt McChlery. Welcome to the show today. Now, on today's show, I am going to be speaking to Chris Kandiah about his book called God is Stranger. Let's welcome Krish to the show. Hi, Krish. Thanks so much for joining me on the show today. Now, your book, God is Stranger, it's a very challenging read, I must say. And it touches on quite a political hot potato at the moment in British culture, for sure. I'll just read a little section from it, and then we'll go from there. So you've said, Jesus was a refugee. The Son of God was an asylum seeker. The Prince of Peace went on the run from a brutal and merciless regime, crossing borders to find sanctuary. How can those of us who call ourselves Christians, who claim to belong to a Christian country, not welcome those who follow in Jesus' footsteps as a refugee? Wow. Challenging words, but actually, you're just telling us what happened in the Bible. I mean, what do you think about what happened to Jesus and what's happening now and sort of our Christian response to it?
Thanks, Matt. And yeah, this book, we reissued it. It was originally published in the wake of the Syria refugee crisis. And we thought, these issues have become right bang in the center of our public consciousness again. As we're speaking today, Belfast is waking up to another night of violence, mostly directed at people who are immigrants. You'll know that Belfast is a highly Christian populated area. It's got the most number of churches of anywhere on the planet. And increasingly, I'm finding Christians uncertain about what the Bible has to say about refuge and asylum. And some people very, very certain, and in the name of Christianity, are going on anti-immigration marches. And so I thought, look, let's open up the Bible again and help people to engage with what the scripture says. And it's hard because some people say, well, that's different. It's different. They didn't even have refugees back then. And at one level, they're right, because the Refugee Convention is 75 years old, right? So the kind of legal framework that we now have around refugees is different to what it was in Jesus's day. And so, we have to be careful not to be anachronistic. But the Bible has a lot to say about the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. And we tend not to call people widows anymore. Like, I don't go up to the elderly people in the church and say, as a widow, how are you feeling right now? We just don't use that label. Within our care system, we don't call children orphans. We call them vulnerable children, foster children. And we don't call people strangers or wanderers or sojourners, as some of the Bible translations have. We call them asylum seekers or refugees. So the language that was used in the Bible, the closest modern translation that we would have would be those words. And just as in the Bible, there is such an interest in people who are not living with their kind of national group. That's who was a stranger. And they were particularly vulnerable because they didn't have a safety network of family around them. In the ancient world, there wasn't a kind of welfare state. And so if you were in trouble, you needed to rely on your family. That's why the widow was particularly vulnerable, because in a patriarchal society, her husband would look after her. And that's why the orphan is actually a translation of the fatherless, because in a patriarchal society, the father would step up. And if you didn't have a father, you were economically and socially very vulnerable. And the stranger, they didn't have any family network because they didn't know anyone in this area. And so the church, and before that, Israel, were called to welcome, include, and offer support. And so, those those laws still stand. You know, it's not just in the Old Testament they talk about that. Jesus talks about it a lot, particularly in one of his most scary parables, the parable of the sheep and the goats. So I think the Bible's got something really important to say, and often the Bible is countercultural. It challenges the prevailing cultural narrative, and that can be awkward for the church, because when something's countercultural, it makes us different, and it makes us feel a little bit nervous to go against the flow. But actually, that is our calling. We're called to be light in the darkness, salt on in society, and salt doesn't look or feel like the rest of society. Light doesn't look like the darkness, so we're going to stand out. And if we're just going along with the cultural trend, there's something wrong with us. We've accommodated our faith. And so I guess we shouldn't be surprised that the Bible's teaching on this is contested at the moment.
No, I like what you say about, well, the Bible has always been countercultural, hasn't it? Christianity is countercultural. And so we shouldn't really be surprised when it kind of makes us feel a bit uncomfortable at times. And we shouldn't just go with something just because, oh, well, that's the more comfortable option. Really. But your book, speaking of feeling uncomfortable, your book digs heavily into awkward, difficult and strange parts of the Bible, which I found particularly interesting. Why is wrestling with these unsettling passages necessary if we want to grow into mature disciples?
Good question, Matt. I mean, when this book first came out, it was a follow-up to probably the most bought book I have. I won't say successful, because sales are not the only measure of success, but my book Paradoxology, Why Christianity Was Never Meant to Be Simple. And I wrestled in that book with some of the awkward questions that had been building up like unanswered emails in my psyche. And this book looked at, why does God ask Abraham to sacrifice his son? Why does God need Moses to build him a sanctuary when God is everywhere? Why does God ask Joshua to wipe out whole people groups? Why does God not help Job more quickly? So it's really wrestling with those really difficult passages. And in God is Stranger, I kind of take that theme a little bit further and look at the times when God turns up unannounced. He often appears as a stranger, and how we respond to him as a stranger becomes really important. And I think I say earlier in the introduction that I was given a highlighter pen when I first became a Christian, a special one, for a Bible highlighter pen. And you use that for what? Like, you highlight the bits that God got right. You highlight the bits that you agree with. What is the point of a highlighter pen? What about the unhighlighted parts? What about the bits that we don't like or we don't agree with? Surely those are the more important bits, because otherwise we're just using the Bible to support what we already believe, rather than listen to God, who might be challenging us about what we need to change.
So many people make the mistake, don't they, of hospitality, or understanding hospitality of meaning, I host a nice dinner party for my friends. How does true biblical hospitality change our modern, comfortable ideas of fellowship?
Oh, that's such a good question, Matt. There is a form of hospitality that says, we must have the Joneses round because they had us last time, and our food's got to be slightly better than their food so that they feel a little bit guilty and then invite us back again. Or, the wine that we might drink, if that's your thing, has to be slightly more expensive than their one. And it's a very middle class idea of hosting dinner parties or, extravagant Sunday lunches. And biblical hospitality is very different. I was a stranger and you welcomed me in. That's from Matthew 25, the sheep and the goats. You see it in Emmaus Road. Do you remember when the disciples are walking back from the crucifixion, desperate, and they come across a stranger who begins to open up the scriptures to them, and they, they've never met him before, but they welcome him into their house, and it's as they welcome him into their house and they're breaking bread that suddenly their eyes are opened. So in the act of hospitality, we are encountering someone made in the image of God. That's true for everybody. But sometimes it feels like, at least in these Bible stories, God is like a mystery shopper who is coming unannounced to test to see how we, his people, will respond to him as he approaches us as someone in need. And it plays a little game with that, because there are definitely times when God turns up like that to Abraham, for example. And yet everybody is an opportunity to show how we relate to God through hospitality. So that's a really, really important idea. And there are lots of examples in the Bible, but there are lots of examples in human history. I draw on Corrie ten Boom, who was a hero of mine growing up during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. She offered hospitality to Jews who were fleeing Nazi persecution, and her whole family did that, and hid them in a cellar underneath their kitchen table. Right? It was just incredible, and was incredibly costly and sacrificial. And genuine hospitality is sacrificial. It isn't just kind of regifting a box of chocolates that someone gave you that you didn't really want. It's being willing to open your life, your home, to others. We've experienced that a little bit through being foster parents for the last 20 years. And, the things we've learned about God through the privilege and the challenge of welcoming children who've had the most difficult starts in life have been profound. And, more recently, I run a refugee charity where we're encouraging people to open their homes, and they did to Ukrainians in huge numbers, which was phenomenal. And again, it's not middle class, just put someone up in your alternative residence. It could mean, having someone come and live in your house, and you begin to share what you do have, however meager that may be.
Really, really good, really challenging, but really good. So as you've mentioned, welcoming the stranger can be messy, and inconvenient and costly. How do we hold the line, though, between having healthy personal boundaries and then also answering this sort of sacrificial call to radical hospitality?
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting we put that word radical in front. And in Matthew 25 and in the Bible, it's not radical, it's normal.
It's expected,
so it's expected, right? These are minimum requirements of the Christian life, because in Matthew 25, we're being told this isn't for, whether you're close to the throne of God or far away from the throne of God. This is, are you actually welcomed into the kingdom of heaven at all? Because if you don't, if you're not showing God's compassion to the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, Jesus says, well, you're not coming in at all. Like, what you didn't do for the least of these, you did for me. So we're not talking about some Christians might like to, sing charismatic worship songs, and some might like to sing organ music, and some people might like to show hospitality, and some might like to do apologetics, or it's not a smorgasbord that you get to pick. This is essential. The essential determinant of whether you're in the kingdom or not is how we're showing the love and mercy of God to other people. So I just want to frame that. I think the other thing is Jesus sets the standard. So as I have loved you, love one another. And there are appropriate boundaries, but some of those boundaries we've developed have been set by our culture and not by scripture. And that's where things get messy and challenging. So I don't know. I had to answer a survey recently. Which book are you glad you didn't have to read more than once? And there was a book I really, really struggled with called The Relentless Elimination of Hurry, which was all about building boundaries around yourself so that you would have enough time in your life. And at one level, it sounded really healthy. The author didn't do emails because he found them too invasive. And I'm going, okay, that's interesting. Like, how do other people feel about you never answering an email? Like that gives you boundaries, but how does that help? And the book was really strong on making sure that you had space and rest, but said nothing about you providing rest for other people. And I was nervous that somehow, maybe that was a publisher decision and the author had loads to say about helping the poor and the vulnerable. He just didn't get to put it in. Maybe that was a decision that was out of his hands, maybe. So who knows, right? You can't always judge a book even by its content. but as it read to me, it sounded like that was not an important aspect. And you can imagine Jesus in the parable saying, I was hungry and you decided you didn't have any time in your calendar. I was thirsty and you decided that you really needed some personal boundaries. I was a stranger and you needed some time off. It's like, no, I'm sorry, that wasn't given to us. I mean, if you look at Jesus, was he a boundaried person? At one level, he really was. He would often retreat to be by himself, to spend time with God. And that's really great. But there was another time when, Jesus was trying to get away from the crowds and they followed him. And he didn't say, this is my Sabbath, right? I'm not interested. He was tired. I mean, that's the incredible beauty of the incarnation, that he was fully human and subject to being thirsty, being tired. I mean, he's emotional. He tells his disciples that his heart is overwhelmed to the point of death, right? And he's open about that. And yet still, he had compassion on this crowd, even though they'd come to him while he was taking time out, and he feeds them. And you go, okay, Jesus, did you just break the boundary rule? Like, surely you should have been a little bit harder on them so that you could be a little bit easier on yourself. But that's not the way he's wired. Where were Jesus's boundaries when he was dying on the cross? I mean, like, I've taken enough pain. Thank you. Not anymore. It's not my responsibility to die for the sins of the world. So at one level, I do appreciate self-care. This is a marathon, not a sprint. We need to, be mindful of capacity. But at another level, Jesus does call us to sacrifice. Only he can sacrifice on behalf of humanity and offer a perfect atonement to God. But he says, as I have loved you, love one another. So, that's the tension I think we've got to live in. And some people get it wrong either way, too sentimental and protectionist, some, too activist and, exhaustion. So, I mean, that's the wonderful power of Scripture, is it's going to challenge us wherever we are on that spectrum.
So as you mentioned earlier, that you've set up various different organizations like Home for Good and Sanctuary Foundation, and you've seen the church rally around fostering and refugees and things of that nature. How does opening our actual homes transform the way that we disciple our own children?
Yeah, really good question. So let me put it another way. I've met people who tell me that they'd love to foster and adopt children or welcome refugees, but they're worried about the negative impact it will have on their kids. And as parents, whether birth parents, kinship carers, foster parents, adoptive parents, whoever's currently in your care has got to take kind of primary responsibility, right? And no one else has that responsibility except you. So, there are some things we've really got to think about. But I often ask parents, well, what are your ambitions for your children? And they'll often say, I want them to get a good job. I want them to get married. I want them to get a good education, maybe learn a musical instrument, maybe learn a sport. I'm like, that's brilliant. I think most parents, particularly middle-class parents, would have those same ambitions. Do you have any specifically Christian ambitions for your children? And go, oh, yeah, I want them to be like Jesus. I'm going, okay, great. How would you describe Jesus? Oh, he was loving, kind, compassionate, sacrificial. Oh, good. How do our children become loving, kind, and compassionate? There are different schools of thought on that. Some people, it's Bible teaching, right? If you go to a good Bible teaching church and they teach the Bible regularly, that's how it will happen. And I'm going, okay, I definitely believe the Bible has a transformative effect. But how do we equate for, the Levites or the Pharisees? They really knew their scriptures, but they weren't practicing it. Some people say, God's going to zap it into my kids. We'll go to a charismatic church. They'll go forward at the front. Someone will pray over them, and they were mean before, but now, boom, they've been transformed into compassionate, kind, and generous kids. Most of us are not convinced that's how it happens. Well, we often grow in holiness and in the fruit of the Spirit and in the character of Christ by actually putting it into practice, what the scriptures have to say. It's character formation. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen just intellectually. You learn by doing. You develop virtues as you continually practice these things. So, being a foster parent, adoptive parent, welcoming refugees, it's good in its own right, because you're showing and demonstrating real love to real people. But a collateral benefit of doing that is it's giving your children an opportunity to put into practice the character of God. And again, there are boundaries on that, and your own kids. But for me as a parent, I've seen my children become more loving, more compassionate, because they've been an older sibling to foster children. We've been doing it for 20 years now, and it's become a practice for them. It's become how they live out the Christian faith, and it's how we do it as a family. So it is integrated into the discipleship of our kids.
Oh, that's great. Really, really interesting stuff. Now, just before we take a break, for someone who's listening to this, who might be prompted by your book, God is Stranger, what is one small practical step that they can take this week to live out the surprising power of hospitality in their own neighborhood?
So one practical thing we could do is just be attentive to the people around us, genuinely listen. And this is true whether you're someone who is a student, maybe you're currently sofa surfing, you're renting, you own a house, to be attentive to those around us. I was really struck by this, that a refugee friend of mine from Iran was absolutely desperate at Christmas about how she was going to put food on the table for her family. And she couldn't afford a turkey, but really wanted to provide a turkey. And so she did. She went to the local butcher's, couldn't afford it, and then the butcher was just incredibly attentive to her and let her have this prize turkey for a fraction of the cost, just whatever she had. He was willing to take it as payment. But she noticed on her way to church a young woman crying at a bus stop, and she noticed her on the way back from the Christmas Day service and said, "Are you okay? What's happening?" And she said, "I've got nowhere to go. It's Christmas Day." And so she invites her to her house to have Christmas dinner with her, with this turkey that she'd got as a, so cheaply from the butcher. And I thought, wow, do you know what I mean? This refugee already had enough on her plate to not worry. Like, she could just focused on her own needs. She had enough to deal with, and yet still reached out in love and mercy to someone else in need. So I think that's a basic takeaway, to be attentive, whatever we're going through, to the needs of other people around us.
That's great advice. Thank you, Krish. We'll be back just after these with some more with Chris Kandiah, talking all about his book, God is Stranger. So do stay tuned. If you enjoy listening to this podcast, you can help keep it on the web. All you've got to do is buy me a coffee. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/Matt McChlery to make a donation. There is a link in this episode's show notes. So go on, buy me a coffee today and help this podcast to keep supporting Christian books and authors. Hello, welcome back to the Christian Book Blurb show. Just before the break, we were chatting with Chris Kandiah about his book, God is Stranger. This side of the break, Krish, we like to get to know the author a little bit better. Now, as we've been chatting, I know the listeners can't see, but I can see behind you. And I've been trying to figure out what those album covers are, because I'm presuming they're album covers. Is one of them Tracy Chapman's famous album?
Yes, one of them's Tracy Chapman. I had a little period in my life when I was a teenager and I was very into my records, vinyl. And then we all transitioned to CDs because we thought vinyl was so yesterday. So there's a little window, and Tracy Chapman was in that window. And then more latterly, my kids, when it's Father's Day or a birthday, they're very kind and they buy me a record. So I've been bought Amy Winehouse, Back to Black. I really liked the Guardians of the Galaxy. So this is a Guardian of the Galaxy compilation. And then I've inherited my mother's record collection, and this is The Sound of Music. So
I was wondering, I was like,
yeah.
Could that be? Maybe not. Somebody's skipping, but yeah, okay, yeah, wonderful. Oh, great. What do you like doing in your spare time, Krish? If you have any, that is.
I love cycling, and I kind of weave it into my daily commute. So I skip a couple of stations to be able to cycle a little bit further on my tiny little fold-up bicycle. I'm a film buff, so we're very blessed. We have a very, very close local cinema that I can walk to in 3 minutes. So whenever it says it's going to be the film, I leave the house when the film's supposed to start, and I still get there before the trailers. So
yeah, skip the adverts. Nice. Yeah. No, it's good. What's one of the great films? What have you watched recently that you were like, wow, that's good?
Well, a whole range, actually. The most unusual, didn't know where it was going, nearly turned it off because I thought it was weird, film I saw recently was Begonia. I don't know if you've seen that. Emma Stone is in that. And yeah, I mean, not to give away anything, the setup for the film is we've got these two young men who are socially isolated in America, and they are absolutely overwhelmed with what's going on in their world, which feels very familiar to a lot of people. They're reading a lot on the internet, and they've decided the biggest problem are the huge corporates. And so they abduct a CEO of a large corporate. And at one stage, I thought, oh man, maybe this is not the kind of film I want to watch, but stick with it. It goes on a real roller coaster of a ride, and asks some really interesting questions.
Interesting. Yeah, no, good. I've got some young kids, so to be honest, when we go to the cinema, it's usually with them. So the kind of film, the most recent film I watched with them was The Sheep Detectives.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Sheep Detectives. That was quite fun.
Our family's super excited about Toy Story 5, and I'm not normally excited about that many sequels. But
they tend to lose something after number 3.
Yeah, or even after number 1.
Or even number 1.
Cashing in. Frozen 2, a film that really didn't need to exist, and actually made me feel worse about the first one. But
and Moana, where all the songs are exactly the same.
Oh, as the first yeah, you're right. Right.
Do you like eating food or visiting countries and all that kind of thing?
Yeah, I do like eating food. That's it. I get to travel a lot, which is a real gift from God, but also a gift from my family that they recognize I'm very interested in being useful globally. So last week I was in Washington DC, Rome, and Finland in the same week, which is very unusual for me. More travel in that intensity than I've probably ever had in my life, but it's always a privilege to try the local delicacies. So pickled herring in Finland. I mean, everyone loves Italian food, but to have it cooked by an Italian person within a throwing distance of the Vatican was special. And Washington, D.C., I was in a 2-hour queue for a food truck and had the deepest, richest conversation with a stranger that I've had for a long time. So that was fun.
Brilliant, Krish. That's brilliant. Now, can you tell us where can people find you online, and more importantly, where can people find and buy a copy of your book, God is Stranger?
Oh, yeah, great. People can connect with me. LinkedIn is my happy place. I'm very easy to find. I think there's one of me, Chris Kandiah, and if you put Sanctuary Foundation, you'll definitely find me. I found people more civil on LinkedIn because people are actually using it to try and get a job, and your future boss will read your posts. Although that isn't necessarily stopping people from being quite angry sometimes too. I do try to use Instagram, and after a very painful leaving, I left Twitter. I haven't deleted my account yet, but I hardly use it anymore. But those are the places, LinkedIn and Instagram, Chris Kandiah.
That's great, Krish. And where can people buy a copy of your book, God is Stranger?
Well, the good thing is you can buy it at all good bookshops. So if you have a Christian bookshop, please support your local Christian bookshop. They are... they, like everyone else on the high street, they're struggling. So if we can give them any support, a Christian bookshop played a really important part in my spiritual formation. I became a Christian as a teenager, but my local Christian bookshop manager was very kind to me, and either let me have very cheap or reasonable books, or just gave me great advice. And he introduced me to The Cross of Christ by John Stott, and that was really part of my journey to become a theologian. So please support your local Christian bookshop. But I'm also a big fan of eden.co.uk, and it's available there. They got a good discount on it. If you really can't find it anywhere else, it is also available on Amazon.
Well, Krish, that just leaves me to say thank you. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Christian Book Blurb Show. It was wonderful chatting with you, fascinating, and a fantastic and challenging book. So thank you for that. Also, thank you for listening to this episode of the Christian Book Blurb podcast. It comes out on the 1st and the 15th of every month. So it won't be long when I'll be back again really soon, speaking to another Christian author all about their books, their life, and their faith. So keep tuned, subscribe, like, follow, do all the things that you do. And I look forward to having the pleasure of your company again really soon. Thank you. Goodbye. Thanks for listening to Christian Book Blurb with your host, Matt McChlery. Do give it a like, give it a share, and let your friends know all about it. We do hope to see you again soon on another Christian Book Blurb.